Most people assume vegetables always grow better in the ground. More soil, more space, more room for roots to spread. It sounds logical, but surprisingly, some vegetables actually perform better in containers. They grow faster, produce cleaner harvests, suffer from fewer diseases, and in some cases they even yield more food than plants growing in traditional garden beds. That's because containers give gardeners something the ground often cannot: control, better drainage, better soil quality, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and the ability to move plants exactly where they need to be. In today's video, we're counting down 15 vegetables that often grow healthier, cleaner, and more productively in containers than they do in the ground. And stay until the end, because the final plant on this list is so perfectly suited for containers that many gardeners never grow it in garden beds at all. Let's get started. At number 15, we have carrots. Most people picture carrots growing deep underground in a traditional garden bed. But surprisingly, containers often produce better carrots than the ground ever could. Here's why. Garden soil is rarely perfect. It contains rocks, sticks, hard clay, and compacted areas that force carrots to twist, split, and grow into strange shapes. That's one reason so many homegrown carrots look crooked or stunted. Containers solve that problem immediately. Loose potting soil allows carrot roots to grow straight downward without fighting obstacles. The result is smoother, cleaner, more uniform carrots. Another huge advantage is weed control. Carrot seedlings are tiny and delicate during their early stages. In garden beds, weeds often compete aggressively for space and nutrients. But in containers, weeds are far easier to manage. Busy gardeners love that simplicity. Containers also make harvesting easier. Instead of digging through heavy soil, you can simply loosen the potting mix and pull the carrots cleanly from the container. And because containers warm faster in spring, carrot seeds often germinate more quickly than they do in cold garden soil. Many gardeners are shocked by how productive container carrots can become. A deep container just 12 inches deep can produce a surprisingly large harvest in a very small footprint. And for people gardening on patios, balconies, or small suburban yards, that's a game changer. Sometimes the secret to growing better carrots isn't having more space. It's having better control over the space you already have. Moving down to number 14, garlic. Garlic may seem like a crop that belongs in large garden beds, but containers often give it major advantages. One of garlic's biggest enemies is excess moisture. Wet soil can quickly lead to fungal disease and bulb rot, especially during colder months. Traditional garden beds sometimes hold far more water than garlic wants. Containers solve that problem beautifully. Potting mixes drain faster, dry more evenly, and give gardeners much better moisture control. That's exactly why many container-grown garlic bulbs end up healthier than those grown in the ground. Another benefit is soil quality. Garlic thrives in loose, fertile soil that allows bulbs to expand easily underground. Containers let you create that perfect environment from day one. And because weeds are easier to control in pots, garlic faces less competition during its long growing cycle. Busy gardeners appreciate crops that quietly grow in the background, without demanding constant attention. Garlic does exactly that. Plant the cloves in fall, water occasionally, and let nature do most of the work. Then months later, you harvest beautiful bulbs with far less digging and soil cleanup than traditional gardening requires. Even better, containers can be moved into protected areas during severe weather. giving garlic extra protection during freezing temperatures or excessive rain. It's one more example of how containers provide flexibility that traditional gardens often can't match. At number 13, we have lettuce. Containers solve one of lettuce's biggest enemies, heat. Traditional garden beds absorb massive amounts of summer warmth, which causes lettuce to bolt quickly and turn bitter. But containers give gardeners mobility, and that changes everything. As temperatures rise, you can simply move lettuce into partial shade during the hottest part of the day. That small advantage can extend your harvest by weeks. Another reason lettuce thrives in containers is pest reduction. Slugs, snails, and soil insects often attack lettuce growing directly in garden beds. Elevated containers make access much harder for many pests, which means cleaner leaves and healthier plants. Busy gardeners also appreciate how convenient container lettuce becomes during harvesting. Instead of walking into the garden every day, fresh salad greens can sit just outside your kitchen door. Snip a few leaves, harvest what you need, and let the plant continue growing. That's exactly the kind of low-effort system people love. Containers also allow for succession planting with almost no hassle. Once one batch finishes, you refill the container and start again. No major soil preparation required. And because lettuce has shallow roots, even relatively small containers can produce impressive harvests. For apartment gardeners, balcony growers, and anyone short on space, container lettuce often becomes one of the easiest and most rewarding crops they grow all season. At number 12, we have radishes. Few vegetables respond to containers as quickly as radishes. In fact, many gardeners discover that radishes grow faster and cleaner in pots than they ever do in traditional garden beds. One reason is soil compaction. Radishes hate hard soil. Compacted ground slows root development and produces small, woody harvests. Containers eliminate that problem. Loose potting mix allows radishes to expand quickly and evenly underground. Another advantage is temperature. Containers warm up earlier in spring, which speeds germination and root growth. That's why some gardeners harvest container radishes in as little as 3 to 4 weeks. It's one of the fastest gardening rewards you can experience. Busy gardeners love quick results because quick results create motivation, and radishes deliver exactly that. Another benefit is cleanliness. Pulling radishes from containers is incredibly easy compared to digging through heavy soil. The roots come out cleaner, smoother, and often more attractive overall. Containers also reduce weed pressure dramatically, which matters because radishes grow so quickly that they hate competition during early growth stages. Even a shallow container can support a surprisingly productive radish crop. That's why so many beginner gardeners succeed with them almost immediately. And once people experience the speed and simplicity of container radishes, many never bother growing them in the ground again. At number 11, we have peppers. This surprises many gardeners. But pepper plants often produce more fruit in containers than they do in the ground. Why? Because peppers actually enjoy slightly restricted root systems. In large garden beds, pepper plants sometimes focus too heavily on leafy growth instead of fruit production. Containers create just enough root restriction to encourage more energy toward peppers instead of oversized foliage. Another advantage is warmth. Pepper plants absolutely love heat, and containers warm up faster than garden soil. Warmer roots mean faster growth, earlier flowering, and heavier production. That's one reason container peppers often outperform their in-ground counterparts, especially in cooler climates. Containers also improve drainage, which peppers appreciate enormously. Wet feet can stunt growth and increase disease risk. Potting mixes reduce that problem significantly. Busy gardeners also benefit from flexibility. Containers can be moved into better sunlight, protected during storms, or repositioned as temperatures change throughout the season. And because peppers naturally grow well in medium-sized containers, even patios and balconies can produce impressive harvests. Many container pepper plants produce dozens of peppers in a single season with surprisingly little maintenance. That's a remarkable return for such a compact growing space. Sometimes growing better vegetables isn't about expanding your garden. It's about creating the right conditions in a smaller, more controlled environment. Coming in at number 10 is a plant you actually want to trap, mint. Most gardeners don't struggle to grow mint. They struggle to stop it. That's exactly why containers are often the best possible place for this aggressive plant. In traditional garden beds, mint spreads rapidly through underground runners, quickly invading nearby spaces and competing with other vegetables. What begins as a small herb patch can easily become a garden takeover. Containers solve that problem immediately. Instead of fighting to control mint, you simply give it its own contained environment where it can grow freely without causing chaos. And once mint has that space, it thrives with very little effort. The plant grows quickly, recovers rapidly after harvesting, and tolerates occasional neglect surprisingly well. Busy gardeners love crops that continue producing even when life gets hectic. And mint does exactly that. Another advantage is accessibility. A container placed near the kitchen door means fresh mint is always within reach for tea, desserts, salads, drinks, or sauces. And because containers improve drainage, mint often develops healthier roots compared to plants growing in overly wet garden soil. The plant also benefits from slightly warmer soil temperatures in containers, which helps encourage faster growth during cooler parts of the season. Many gardeners eventually realize something surprising about mint. Containers don't limit it. Containers actually help it perform better by controlling its environment while preventing competition from surrounding plants. That's why so many experienced gardeners refuse to grow mint directly in the ground ever again. At number 9, we have green onions. Some vegetables need large gardens to succeed. Green onions are not one of them. In fact, they may be one of the most container-friendly crops on this entire list. Their compact root systems allow gardeners to grow them densely in relatively small pots, which means even tiny balconies or patios can produce impressive harvests. Another major advantage is convenience. Instead of walking out to a distant garden bed every time you need fresh onions, container-grown green onions can sit just steps away from your kitchen. That's especially valuable for busy gardeners who want quick access to fresh ingredients without extra work. Containers also improve soil control. Green onions prefer loose, fertile soil with good drainage, and potting mixes create exactly that environment. They grow quickly, recover rapidly after harvesting, and can even regrow from kitchen scraps. That's one reason they feel almost endless once established. Another hidden benefit is cleanliness. Rain and muddy garden beds often splash soil onto onion leaves, but elevated containers keep the plants cleaner and easier to harvest. And because green onions grow vertically, they maximize production while taking up very little horizontal space. A single rectangular planter can hold dozens of plants. For urban gardeners, apartment growers, and anyone working with limited space, container-grown green onions often become one of the most reliable and productive crops in the entire garden. At number 8, we have potatoes. Harvesting potatoes in containers feels almost like digging for treasure. And surprisingly, many gardeners discover that containers actually simplify potato growing in almost every possible way. Traditional garden beds can make potato harvesting messy and labor-intensive. Dig too aggressively and you accidentally damage the crop underground. Containers eliminate much of that problem. Instead of digging through heavy soil, you simply dump the container or grow bag and collect the potatoes directly. It's cleaner, easier, and far more satisfying. Another major advantage is pest reduction. Potatoes growing in the ground are more vulnerable to soil-borne diseases and pests that can damage developing tubers. Fresh container soil helps reduce many of those issues. Grow bags also improve drainage dramatically, which potatoes appreciate because overly wet soil increases the risk of rot. Busy gardeners especially love the flexibility of container potatoes. You can position them in the sunniest areas of the yard, move them if necessary, and even grow them in spaces where traditional gardening would be impossible. Another benefit is space efficiency. Potatoes naturally grow vertically when hilled properly, which means containers allow gardeners to maximize production in a surprisingly small footprint. And few gardening experiences feel as rewarding as tipping over a grow bag and discovering dozens of potatoes hidden inside. It's one of the simplest ways to make gardening feel exciting again. At number 7, we have cucumbers. Cucumbers often struggle in traditional garden beds because poor airflow creates the perfect environment for mildew and fungal disease. Containers solve much of that problem immediately. When cucumbers are grown vertically in pots with a trellis, airflow improves dramatically around the leaves. Better airflow means healthier plants and fewer disease problems throughout the season. That's one reason container cucumbers frequently outperform ground plants. Another advantage is space efficiency. Instead of sprawling across large sections of the garden, container cucumbers grow upward, making them ideal for patios, balconies, and compact backyards. Busy gardeners love systems that maximize production while minimizing maintenance, and vertical container cucumbers do exactly that. Harvesting also becomes easier because the fruit hangs visibly from the vine rather than hiding beneath tangled leaves on the ground. Cleaner fruit is another bonus. Cucumbers resting directly on soil often develop rot, pest damage, or discoloration. But container-grown vines keep the fruit elevated and healthier overall. Containers also warm up faster in spring, encouraging earlier growth and faster establishment. And because watering can be controlled more precisely, gardeners reduce the risk of stress caused by inconsistent soil moisture. A single healthy cucumber plant in a container can produce an impressive amount of food over the course of a season. That's why so many gardeners are shocked by how productive container cucumbers can become once they're given vertical support and proper sunlight. At number 6, we have eggplant. Eggplants absolutely love warm soil. That's one reason they often grow better in containers than they do in the ground. Traditional garden beds warm slowly in spring, especially in cooler climates. Containers heat up much faster, creating the warm root environment eggplants crave. That extra warmth leads to faster growth, earlier flowering, and often heavier fruit production. Another advantage is drainage. Eggplants dislike soggy soil, and containers give gardeners much more control over moisture levels. Healthy roots create healthier plants, and healthier plants produce more fruit. Busy gardeners also appreciate the flexibility containers provide. Eggplants need full sun, and pots can easily be repositioned throughout the season to maximize light exposure. That's far harder to do with fixed garden beds. Another benefit is appearance. Eggplants are surprisingly ornamental plants with beautiful purple flowers and glossy fruit, which makes them perfect for patios and decorative container gardens. And despite their elegant appearance, they're far tougher than many people expect. Once established, eggplants tolerate heat extremely well and continue producing steadily through the hottest parts of summer. Many gardeners are surprised by how productive a single container grown eggplant can become. Under the right conditions, one plant can produce harvest after harvest for months. It's another example of how smaller growing spaces sometimes create better results than large traditional gardens ever could. At number 5, we have cherry tomatoes. Many gardeners struggle with large slicing tomatoes and assume tomatoes simply aren't meant for containers. But cherry tomatoes completely change that story. In fact, many cherry tomato varieties actually perform better in containers than they do in the ground. One reason is disease control. Traditional garden beds often expose tomatoes to soil-borne fungi, splashing rainwater, and inconsistent drainage that increase disease pressure throughout the season. Containers create a far more controlled environment. Better drainage keeps roots healthier, while elevated plants experience improved airflow around the leaves. That airflow matters because tomatoes are highly vulnerable to fungal diseases in humid conditions. Another advantage is root management. Cherry tomatoes naturally produce smaller fruit, so they place less stress on container root systems compared to giant beefsteak varieties. That means the plants can focus more energy on continuous fruit production, instead of struggling to support oversized tomatoes. Busy gardeners also love how productive cherry tomatoes become in compact spaces. A single healthy plant can produce hundreds of small tomatoes throughout the season. And because the fruit ripens gradually, harvesting becomes an ongoing reward rather than one massive event. Containers also make support systems easier to manage. A simple tomato cage or stake inside a pot keeps the plant upright while saving valuable garden space. For balconies, patios, and suburban yards, container cherry tomatoes often become one of the most productive crops people grow all year. And once gardeners experience how easy and rewarding they are, many never return to growing large tomatoes in traditional beds. At number 4, we have bush beans. Bush beans already have a reputation for being easy to grow, but containers make them even more efficient. Unlike pole beans, bush beans stay compact and manageable, which makes them naturally suited for container gardening. They don't demand tall trellises or complicated support structures. Instead, they quietly grow into productive little plants that fill containers with flowers and pods surprisingly quickly. Another major advantage is warmth. Bush beans germinate and establish faster in warm soil, and containers heat up much more rapidly than traditional garden beds during spring. Faster soil warming means earlier growth and often earlier harvests. Busy gardeners love crops that produce quickly, because fast results create momentum and motivation. Another benefit is cleanliness. Pods hanging above container soil stay cleaner and are easier to harvest than beans tangled in muddy garden beds after rainstorms. Containers also improve weed control dramatically, which matters because bush beans prefer minimal root competition during early growth stages. And because they naturally grow in dense clusters, even a medium-sized container can produce an impressive harvest in a surprisingly small area. Some gardeners are shocked by how many meals they can harvest from just a few pots of bush beans. That's exactly why they deserve a place on this list. Containers simplify nearly every part of the growing process while still delivering reliable production. Breaking into the top 3, let's talk about spinach. Traditional garden beds create one major problem for spinach: heat buildup. As temperatures rise, spinach bolts quickly, turning bitter and ending the harvest far sooner than gardeners want. Containers solve that problem beautifully because they provide mobility. Instead of leaving spinach trapped in full sun during hot afternoons, gardeners can simply move containers into partial shade. That flexibility can extend the harvest window significantly. Another advantage is pest control. Ground-grown spinach often attracts slugs and soil insects that damage delicate leaves. Elevated containers reduce many of those issues while keeping leaves cleaner overall. Busy gardeners also appreciate how simple succession planting becomes in containers. Once one batch finishes, another can immediately replace it without major soil preparation or garden cleanup. That's one reason container spinach often feels more productive than spinach grown directly in the ground. Another hidden advantage is moisture control. Spinach prefers consistent moisture, but hates soggy roots. Containers with quality potting mix allow gardeners to maintain that balance far more effectively than unpredictable garden soil. And because spinach has relatively shallow roots, it grows surprisingly well in modest-sized containers. For apartment gardeners, patio growers, and people with limited backyard space, spinach proves that impressive harvests don't require massive gardens. Sometimes all you need is a pot, good soil, and the ability to move the plant when conditions change. At number 2, we have strawberries. After growing strawberries in containers, many gardeners never return to growing them in the ground again. And honestly, it's easy to understand why. Traditional garden beds expose strawberries to countless problems. Slugs damage the fruit. Soil splashes onto berries during rainstorms. Rot develops where strawberries touch wet ground. Containers eliminate nearly all of those issues at once. Elevated berries stay cleaner, healthier, and easier to harvest. Another huge advantage is pest reduction. Keeping strawberries off the ground makes it harder for insects and animals to reach the fruit before you do. Busy gardeners also love the convenience factor. Hanging baskets, vertical towers, and patio containers place strawberries at a comfortable harvesting height instead of forcing gardeners to bend down constantly. Another benefit is runner control. Strawberries naturally spread aggressively in garden beds, which can quickly turn maintenance into a headache. Containers keep the plants organized and manageable, while still allowing excellent production. And because strawberries prefer well-drained soil, containers often create healthier root conditions than heavy ground soil ever could. A few carefully placed strawberry pots can produce an astonishing amount of fruit in very little space. That's why container strawberries have become so popular among urban gardeners and suburban homeowners alike. Sometimes growing better fruit isn't about expanding outward, it's about growing smarter upward. And finally, taking the crown at number 1, basil. If there is one edible plant that truly seems designed for containers, this is it. Basil absolutely thrives in the warm, controlled conditions that containers provide. Traditional garden beds often hold too much moisture around the roots, especially after heavy rain. Basil hates that. Wet feet quickly lead to stress, disease, and poor growth. Containers solve the problem immediately with superior drainage and faster soil warming. Warm roots make basil incredibly happy, and happy basil becomes wildly productive. Another reason basil performs so well in containers is airflow. Proper air circulation helps reduce fungal issues while encouraging healthier leaf production throughout the season. Busy gardeners especially love how easy basil becomes to harvest in pots. Place a container near the kitchen, and fresh leaves are always within reach for pasta, salads, sandwiches, pizza, sauces, and countless other meals. The more you harvest basil, the bushier and more productive it often becomes. That's one reason a single healthy basil plant can provide fresh herbs for months. Another hidden advantage is mobility. Containers can be repositioned to maximize sunlight or protected during severe weather. That flexibility creates stronger plants and longer harvests. And unlike sprawling garden crops that demand huge amounts of space, basil stays compact while delivering continuous rewards. It's the perfect example of how containers don't limit production. Sometimes they unlock it. The biggest mistake many gardeners make is assuming bigger gardens automatically produce better harvests. But sometimes smaller spaces create better growing conditions, better drainage, better airflow, better soil control, fewer weeds, fewer pests, and far more flexibility. That's why so many vegetables actually thrive in containers. You don't need acres of land to grow impressive amounts of food. Sometimes a few well-placed pots can outperform an entire garden bed. And once you experience how productive container gardening can become, you'll start seeing patios, balconies, porches, and sunny corners in a completely different way. Because successful gardening isn't always about having more space. Sometimes it's simply about using space more intelligently.